So, Excellencies, welcome to this session of the second annual meeting of the Aswan Forum, the session on sustaining peace through effective post-conflict reconstruction and development. My name is Ihab Awad Mustafa. I am currently the ambassador of Egypt to the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and formerly the Deputy Assistant Foreign Minister for United Nations Affairs, and earlier a member of Oscar's team at the Peacebuilding Support Office. It is my great pleasure to be moderating this very powerful panel, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion. Excellency, we thank you all for accepting our invitation to this session, and I would like to, through all of you, to thank the Secretariat of the Aswan Forum for pulling this together. COVID-19 has brought forth significant challenges to peace on the African continent, threatening to erode hard-won peace-building and development gains. The pandemic has either delayed or undermined critical steps needed by governments or transitional governments in Africa to improve or strengthen legitimacy or manage emerging tensions, either caused by the economic, humanitarian, or security implications of the pandemic, or inherent in the weaknesses and fragility of peace or transition processes in these countries. Moreover, and at the technical level, peace-building efforts are underpinned by processes aimed at trust building through face-to-face engagement, which were undermined by the pandemic in view of the fact that many communities in Africa were not sufficiently prepared for the shift towards the virtual space and online interaction. Also, the pandemic has disrupted humanitarian access, thus removing vital support services for communities caught in the midst of crises or conflict. Additionally worrying was the widespread evidence that terrorist organizations were not actually deterred by the outbreak of the pandemic. To the contrary, these terrorist organizations have intensified their assaults on civilian populations, government assets, and even United Nations peacekeeping missions. They propagated their radical narratives to undermine the government's enacted public health measures to combat the pandemic. And we've seen that in Somalia. In the identical General Assembly and Security Council resolutions of 21 December 2020, crowning the third five-year review cycle of the United Nations peace-building architecture, member states, and I quote, expressed grave concern about the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic across the world, especially in conflict-affected countries. They recognize that progress towards achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and all its goals and targets could be hampered, and peace-building and development gains reversed. And they emphasize the need to integrate peace-building and sustaining peace into efforts to build back better. The paradigm shift espoused by the previous five-year review of the United Nations peace-building architecture in 2016 is now being understood as our drive towards reimagining our policies and tools so as they become fit for the purpose of helping states and societies in building resilience to withstand the shocks caused by outbreak of pandemics in the future, climate-related crises, natural disasters, and violent conflicts. Nonetheless, progress was made in advancing peace processes in post-conflict settings in Africa. Such progress underscores the imperative for recalibrating international, continental, and national efforts to ensure that fragile peace is not reversed. The implications of the pandemic also reaffirm the imperative for peace building to be anchored in national and local ownership. As some researchers found, the pandemic has enabled, to a certain degree, the realization of the long-standing aspiration to localize peace building. Others found that while there is hardly any empirical data that supports the existence of correlations between COVID-19 and conflict, especially in Africa, the long-term impact of the pandemic on fragile peace and simmering tensions within societies on the continent cannot be underestimated. Thus, calling it to our attention, the need to think about Africa's peace building and sustaining peace needs and ownership and priorities in the shadow and the aftermath of the pandemic. This session will examine ongoing efforts in Africa to adapt to the new normal in the most fragile and sensitive contexts of crises and post-conflict settings. It will shed light on how national, regional, and international actors are recalibrating their tools in support of a resilience paradigm in Africa. It will be great if we can, on this panel, and over the next 90 minutes, if we can unpack what does this actually mean in specific contexts across the continent. And we are happy to have Her Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Sudan, joining us today. In this vein, our discussion will also shed light on how significant is the outcome of the 2020 review of the UN peacebuilding architecture in renewing the United Nations and the international community's commitment to the partnership with the African Union, as it revives its post-conflict reconstruction and development policy framework, and as it prepares to roll out the new Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development, which is currently in Cairo. That center as the provider of relevant expertise on policy and programming options to the African Union, and as a tool in support of the AU Commission to assume a central role in strengthening coherence among relevant African actors and external partners. And we are delighted to have Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, the new commissioner for the amalgamated political peace and security department at the AU Commission. And for this discussion, we have a super panel of distinguished African figures and international partners. First, Her Excellency Beatrice Kamisawani, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of South Sudan. His Excellency Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, Commissioner for Peace, Security and Political Affairs of the African Union Commission. Mr. Solomon Quaynor, Vice President, Private Sector, Infrastructure and Industrialization at the African Development Bank. Mr. Oscar Fernandez Taranco, Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support at the United Nations. His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Idris, Permanent Representative of Egypt to the United Nations and the Chair of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission. Last but not least, Ms. Janine Allen Eriksson, State Secretary to the Minister for International Development Cooperation, Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Sweden. I welcome you all and looking forward to our discussion. Let me start and call on Her Excellency Beatrice Kamisa-Wani, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of South Sudan. Your Excellency, following the signing of the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in the Republic of South Sudan in 2018, an agreement on the formation of a unity government was reached in February 2020, marking the start of a 36-month transitional period ahead of elections. A year later, in 2021, the appointment of the governors for the Republic's 10 states was successfully concluded, with the last one being the Upper Nile state. Such commendable progress in the peace process has resulted in a significant decrease in armed violence across the country. Nonetheless, challenges remain to sustaining peace and development in South Sudan, especially in the light of the pandemic. And here I would like to ask you this question, or these couple of questions. COVID-19 has had multi-layered implications across different sectors in Africa, including health, economy, and education, just to name a few. Zooming in on the transitional period in South Sudan, what challenges has the pandemic brought forth or aggravated in the context of South Sudan? How does Your Excellency envisage a long-term recovery, and what type of partnership frameworks with both the African Union and the United Nations and other regional and international financial institutions are needed from South Sudan's perspective for strengthening national and local resilience and for paving the path for sustaining peace and development in South Sudan? Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are located. It gives me pleasure to participate in this forum today, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this second edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development under the theme, Shaping Africa's New Normal, Recovering Stronger and Building Better. I hope South Sudan will be able to recover stronger and build better given our multiple issues. I'm further honored to share some of the experiences on the topic of sustaining peace through effective post-conflict reconstruction and development, with reference to the implementation of the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in the Republic of South Sudan, which I would prefer to call the revitalized agreement because it's quite a mouthful. Your Excellencies, the achievement of sustenance of durable peace is what South Sudanese from all walks of life have been yearning for, dating back to our pre-independence years. To many, sustainable peace means provision of services, namely health, education, clean drinking water, opening up the country through infrastructural development. This can be feasible with support from partners from within the region, the continent, and indeed the international community. For others, peace deliverables include empowering the youth, women, the formal and informal sectors, return of refugees and IDPs to their places of origin. This indeed was the path envisaged by my president, His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit, when in February 2020, he returned the country from 32 states to 10 states, and also the subsequent appointment of the presidency and the cabinet. However, these elaborate aspirations have been hit hard with challenges, both man-made and natural, at the top of which are the advent of COVID-19 that has almost paralyzed government, all sectors of government, given that the government has a very fragile infrastructural base. So it has hit the economic sector, the health sector, the services sector, in addition to the fact that we have serious flooding in 7 out of the 10 states in the country, which has resulted in massive displacements and has impacted on food security. And we have also had locust invasion, which has almost decimated some farms. So looking at all this, you can imagine that our issue is not only COVID-19, but it is COVID-19 and a multiplicity of others. So we are kind of drowning in this kind of situation. The other issue also, which was provided for in the peace agreement, is that government with the partners would fund the peace agreement. So far, funding in terms of liquidity has only come from government. So we are really urging that also partners put in something. There's also the issue of cessation of hostilities, where parties are not adhering to, which is causing further complications, in addition to what you mentioned as the conflict, communal conflicts, which are also impacting on our country. On top of it all, we have the issue, the intricacies of navigating a huge coalition government. You know, we have one president, one first vice president, and 4 other vice presidents. And in each, there is a multiplicity of other parties. So reaching agreements is not very easy. It needs a lot of tact, negotiations, and convincing. So it's a lot of work. And all this has been punctuated by gaps due to, as what I said, the COVID-19 pandemic. The above notwithstanding, you know very well some of the issues that we have accomplished in the revitalized government. In chapter 1 of the agreement, we talked about governance. We have completed, of course, the structures at the national and almost state, and we are coming up to local levels, which we are soon completing. We are now working on the reconstitution of parliament, which is the Transitional National Legislative Assembly, as per the agreement. And therefore, with the cooperation from the international community, we hope we get this continuous engagement so that progress is made at this juncture. In chapter 2, where we talk about security arrangements, soldiers have been assembled in various cantonment areas, and the first batch has been trained. And therefore, much as we appreciate the support from Africa, from Asia, from the world, the support in form of provision of food and non-food items, we also look forward to more support so that these soldiers are capacitated so that they can graduate. We need the international community to urge that the ban on procurement of weapons to allow them to graduate can be lifted, because some of these critical soldiers will serve as VVIP protection. I know there's been commendable effort by African countries, by the United States of America, by the EU in providing all the support. However, we also need, there's need to craft a comprehensive DDR strategy, because you have heard so much about how arms are in the hands of communities, can we have a comprehensive DDR strategy, which should be worked on between government and the international community, so that government also feels that ownership. And with that, then we can see if there are countries that can pledge to say, okay, we'll support you, maybe not in cash, not necessarily, but also support in kind. You know, that is also for us very important. There is need that those who have been phased out through the DDR process should also earn a living if we are to avoid further conflict. And that can happen so that their future is also assured, so that they don't return to armed conflict, because it has been a vicious circle. Once somebody is out of job and then they feel the frustration, they go back and then they become, they start some armed conflict. This is something which we need to avoid. All this I'm talking, knowing very well that COVID-19 is very much here with us. And we have been, as South Sudan, sometimes we say we are blessed because of maybe our weather, because of our genes, because of what we have been through. Maybe we are not very hard hit like the other countries. This is what we have always prided ourselves in, until something like a month ago, where we are seeing now that the surge is now coming, people are now being affected. So what do we do as a country? What do we do with partners? Yes, partners have provided us with there's a mobile lab which we have courtesy of the Germany that has provided us that lab. We have put it at the borders, but that's not enough. We need to have things like even the masks. The masks that are disposable for us will not work because the communities cannot afford them and they can not go down. How do we work together so that we make our own masks? Can we be supported in that so that it goes up to the states and county levels? That's very, very important. We also don't have facilities, no referral hospitals. Sometimes it's a problem. And therefore, most of the time, people are at home, and that also poses a risk to the others. Jobs have been impacted because of the sickness, the COVID-19. We are scaling down. Sometimes we have to create office space so that we can have few people working at the same time. That impacts on productivity. And yet we are also we don't have the right infrastructure, ICT. Not everybody can afford to have a virtual meeting like this, although they are really important. So how does the international community help? This is also a question that maybe you can help us resolve, because everything boils down to money, to resources. And these are resources that we can hardly afford now because of our prevailing situations, in a situation where some of our oil fields, because of the wars that happened, some of the equipment have been broken. And so how do we want to rehabilitate them so that we can come back to full production? In chapter 3, as I've said, in security arrangements, we need really to have this DDR strategy. South Sudan is also poised that once we finish this first stage, first batch of the training, we'll now start with another second batch. And this second batch will draw a lot of lessons from the experience that we would have had from the training of this first batch. Training also needs support from experts, some experts that have gone through this kind of situation before, or those who have studied and known what to do. So there's need for us to call for the international community to come and engage with South Sudan so that together we can see what to do and how to plan things going forward. But then again, now we are seeing a situation where we cannot have face-to-face meetings. Today I had a meeting with the 3 people. I had enough space, but it's not always that you can have a meeting unless it is virtual. That for us is not practical at the moment. We also have a situation of the Rome talks where they hold up groups under the mediation of St. Egidio, and we really commend that. And this is ongoing. We hope this will also help to bring peace to our country. In chapter 3, humanitarian assistance and reconstruction, I did mention before the challenges that South Sudan is facing. Much as it is now, we are now trying to soften humanitarian access to affected areas, it is also very difficult. We hardly have any roads to speak thereof. So even humanitarian access is impacted very negatively. And moreover, with our international partners, the way South Sudan is not a family duty station, for example, they have to work maybe 6 weeks. After the 6 weeks, they have to go for R&R. When they come back from R&R, they have to go for Q14. And those, and then after Q14, again, it's difficult for us to have face-to-face meetings. So you can imagine the level, of impact COVID-19 has had on us. But despite this, we also appreciate the support that we are getting, whether from the AU, from the UN. They are also doing their best to help us, but it is not easy. And we are saying together we have to step up, our partnerships with these agencies. As I mentioned earlier, South Sudan is very appreciative of donor support, humanitarian support from the EU, African countries, others including Egypt, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Japan, the US, and so many others, China, and so forth that I have not mentioned. We are grateful, but for us, given our multiplicity of issues, that is a drop. So, but can that be sustainable? What can we do so that we have durable solutions? That is something that we are trying to look at. I have mentioned already that in the health sector, we need capacity strengthening in various areas, especially areas of COVID-19. Even the issue of testing, not many people have been trained in testing. We don't even have maybe enough doctors, enough nurses, enough people who are trained to do with that. And moreover, these same people also are the frontline workers, some of whom are now being affected by this same scourge. How do we deal with that? This is a big problem. We don't have enough testing kits, PCR and reagents, consumables, and all that. But we are also saying that we should not be relying on just receiving, but how can we be capacitated so that we also provide for ourselves? In the education sector, we have had closure of schools due to surge in COVID-19. And for other countries, at least that have facilities, they do online teaching and so forth. For us, it's a different story. We have a problem with power, for example. If you don't have light or energy, what do? That is in addition to not having tablets for the children to access at least teaching online and things like that. So children come home. For girls, especially that have reached adulthood, some of them, we have had cases of girls falling pregnant because they're just at home and they are exposed to all sorts of things, you know. But also what my country has done is for the girls who are sitting in the final exams, whether it's grade 8 or senior 4, things like that, even if the girl has fallen pregnant, we do allow that they go and sit for the exams because we do understand the situation. But this is also a situation that's untenable. How do we make sure that we keep children at least in school or give them online education without the gadgets? What happens? For us, it's a very difficult type that we don't know how to address. In chapter 4, issues of resource and economic and financial management, we appreciate the IMF that has given us some 15% of the targeted support so that we could stabilize our central bank. I think this is the way to go. And we are urging that maybe more funds will come so that we stabilize our economy more so that we can also take care of the prevailing cash crunch. Financial reforms have also been carried out.
Your Excellency, can I come in here to?
Yes, please.
I think we will have another round where we can expand on some of these points. Yes. But I am mindful of the time that is allocated to us. So please, can I kindly ask you to wrap up? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll wrap up by saying we need the support of partners in so many things: infrastructure development, power supply, and also engagement. I thank you so much. I'll continue when questions arise. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Your Excellency. You have really painted for us a very important picture of the type of challenges that a country emerging from conflict in the process of implementing a hard-won peace agreement and in the midst of facing a pandemic that has brought many things to a halt. So I really would like to thank you for highlighting how the pandemic has exacerbated an already fragile and difficult situation. And I very much like and would like really to pick up on what you mentioned about the durability of solutions, that aid and support, while is important, will not replace or substitute for investment in resilience infrastructure for the countries in Africa and the countries such as South Sudan. And we will come back to you, Your Excellency, in another round. I would like now to shift to Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, the Commissioner for Peace, Security and Political Affairs of the African Union Commission. First of all, I would like to officially congratulate Your Excellency on your election as the first commissioner for a merged Peace, Security, and Political Affairs Department. I would like to reflect on President Kagame's words, and I quote, "The unfortunate truth is that Africa today is ill-prepared to adequately respond to current events because the African Union still has to be made fit for purpose." And end of quote. It is most encouraging to witness the African Union moving forward with and advancing its reform process. Your election to this new department is an example of advancing on that path. But Your Excellency's appointment also comes at a time when it is more urgent than ever for African Union engagements and African collective action to be comprehensive, integrated, and sustainable. With that in mind, I would like to ask you a question. How do you envisage a more robust engagement of the African Union in support of sustaining peace and post-conflict reconstruction and development in Africa? To what extent will the new structure of the Political Peace and Security Department, as well as the advent of the AU Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development in Cairo, will help reposition the African Union engagement in crowded peace-building landscape in Africa? Over to you, Your Excellency, and looking forward to your invaluable contribution to this. Are we still having Ambassador Bankole with us? I cannot see him. So I guess not. So the organizers, if there is a technical issue with Ambassador Bankole's connection, would you be able to reconnect him? And in the meantime, I will be moving forward.
Ambassador what?
Okay, great, yeah. Great. So did you hear my questions, Ambassador, or should I repeat them?
Yes, I heard you.
Okay, so it's over to you, sir.
No, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. And I think we really want to thank you for organizing this second edition, to commend you for the ASWAN Forum. I must say that I started my diplomatic career in Cairo, spent 6 years in Egypt, and I can tell you that they were one of the best times in my career. It is also important to know the role that Egypt has played and continues to play in the African Renaissance. We really want to congratulate the government and people of Egypt for this. Let me also touch on the role that I personally played in supporting the peace process in South Sudan. And I'm happy the Honorable Minister here for Foreign Affairs has laid out the plans. Yes, Ambassador, I must say that President Paul Kagame, champion for the AU institutional reform, is absolutely correct. We need to reposition the African Union, its commission in particular, to be able to be fit for purpose and address the challenges of today's world, particularly in the political affairs, peace, and security aspect. I'll be speaking today in my personal capacity because I'll only be taking office on the 15th of March, and I'm still commissioner-elect. I just thought it's necessary to emphasize that. It is also important to emphasize, so I will emphasize a number of issues and going forward. The first is that the set of institutional reform is what you can call a game changer for the African Union. It's a long road ahead, but we are getting there with accelerated implementation. And that boils down to what the restructured political affairs, the merger between the former Department of Political Affairs and the Peace and Security Department will be doing. It offers a number of opportunities, unique opportunities. First, for organizational effectiveness and development within the peace architecture for the Union and the African governance architecture. It is also important that it revitalizes our desire, our strategic goal of a strong, robust conflict, reconstruction, and development. Africa has steadfastly over the years defeated its challenges, whether colonialism, whether apartheid, imperialism, and it is obvious that we will also defeat in the long term terrorism or violent extremism. It is very necessary to emphasize, the third point in my preliminary comment, is that reconstruction, development, peace building, stability, national reconciliation and cohesion are very, very critical for stability, for democracy, the way we plan to go forward. Therefore, the portfolio that I'll be handling, political affairs, peace and security, is so relevant to this senior leadership change, this senior leadership transformation of the Commission, and of course, its impact on the Union and our member states in particular. As we move forward, you will see the interconnections between the post-conflict reconstruction, the Common African Defense and Security Framework Policy, the Silencing the Guns agenda, and of course, Agenda 23, the Africa we want. So to go straight to your question without much ado, it is important to look at what the center, what the post-conflict reconstruction center, which we hope will be operationalized this year, before the end of this year. And I must say that it's going to be one of my top priorities as Commissioner for Political Affairs and Peace and Security. In 2021, we want to see a full operationalization of the center in Cairo. It is important that the expected roles, we familiarize ourselves with what this center will be doing. First, it will technically provide support, backstopping, research work to our various AU liaison offices and special representatives of the chairperson of the Commission in terms of running countries that have experienced conflicts and how to make sure that they really get to a better deal in terms of sustainable development. It is also important that we mainstream, we see the center, and it's indeed statutory to be mainstreaming post-conflict reconstruction interventions in the national cohesion, national reconciliation in the situations they find themselves. We must be able to mobilize support more. The center will be able to mobilize support more for sustainable peace in different areas, particularly peace building, reconstruction, and synergy with other relevant AU organs, be they in the Human and People's Rights Commission in Banjul or the African Court in Arusha. Indeed, we are looking at how the center will be playing a critical role to support the mobilization of African-led institutions working in the development field, particularly the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, and the African Development Bank, which will be able to support, and other multilateral development banks, as well as regional economic communities and regional mechanisms. We must see the center in its role to be able to deliver on collaborative action with the rest, with regional economic communities. But most importantly, how do the center mobilize support for quick impact projects, peace strengthening projects, and of course, SSR, security sector reform that the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Sudan referred to. So when we're talking of transforming agriculture, affordable infrastructure, science, technology, and innovation and education, we'll see a lot in post-conflict countries. And most of our countries will be able to mobilize support collectively for this exercise. It is important that we cannot forget some of the models that are coming out. And I will in this vein, I would like to refer to the regional stabilization strategy that the African Union Commission worked on in 2018 for the Lake Chad Basin region. And I believe we need a similar one for the Sahel, where the G5 Sahel joint force will be able to make things happen faster. The center will supposed to also robustly add value to coherence, policy coherence, and coordination strategies among the various crowded actors that you mentioned, Ambassador Wad. It is important that our policy outcomes for stability, the capacity and training, the analysis for data for data and issues that relate to root causes of crisis in different countries will be the center's major game. It is important we also see that they work more on the results-based management style so that we can make things happen. Let me round up Excellencies, colleagues, by emphasizing that the COVID-19, as has been said, has worsened the fragility in many African countries, particularly those who are undergoing conflicts. But we know that also in the AU, we are not very, very comfortable using the word fragile for some of our countries. We really speak to the transition that is ongoing politically, economically in these countries. But let me end by emphasizing 4 points quickly. The first is that sustainable development implies sustainable peace. And sustainable peace also connotes that
I'm afraid we lost Ambassador Bankole, or is it only me? Anyone else is still hearing?
Yes, all of us have lost him as well.
We
Yes.
got disconnected. Our colleagues, the organizers, can they help us reconnect him so that we can wrap up? Okay.
I'll quickly end up. So these are critical issues that we must build resilience against vulnerabilities in Africa. It's important that it must be all anchored around post-conflict reconstruction and development. It is also important that member states, the African Union, fund the center sustainably. It cannot be business as usual. It's not a center that will be reliant on partners for funding. And we must mainstream PCRD issues in all conflict-free Africa initiatives. This is very critical as we go forward. I really want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Ambassador Bankole. I particularly like your conclusions and the focus on that what is required now in order to reinforce the African Union peace and security architecture and to really make use of a revitalized post-conflict reconstruction and development the policy framework, but also the tool that we have now in our hands in the context of the new center is actually to try to mobilize, first of all, coherence and synergies within within Africa and across the African institutions dealing with the range of peace, security, and development interventions on the one hand, but also to try to put into practice and into action the resilience paradigm that we are addressing. And I like very much your emphasis on that. And I believe that this will be music to the ears of those who are putting together now the infrastructure for the near operation of the center. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, before moving to Vice President of the African Development Bank, I would like to remind you that we are very much short on time, and we would like, please, to ask you to stick to your 6 to 8 minutes intervention in order to have an opportunity for another round of questions. And I started to receive some questions from the floor as well. So thank you very much for your understanding. I'll move now to Mr. Solomon Quaynor, Vice President, Private Sector, Infrastructure and Industrialization of the African Development Bank. Mr. Vice President. You previously noted that the pandemic has revealed the absence of resilience in the African healthcare sector and economies, as well as the vulnerability of sizable segment of our societies to these multi-layered shocks due to weaknesses in social safety nets. This is no ordinary time, Your Excellency, which in turn calls for no ordinary response. Against this backdrop, and the backdrop of this poly-pandemic, if you wish, which is slowing development and exacerbating drivers of state fragility, how is the African Development Bank recalibrating its tools and upscaling its support to countries in Africa facing the challenges of post-conflict reconstruction, such as South Sudan, as we just heard the minister, the Central African Republic, as well, for example, as the Darfur region of Sudan, in order to meet immediate needs while investing in long-term socioeconomic and institutional resilience? Is it feasible to foresee a window of opportunity opening to rebuild back better governance institutions and human capital? What contribution by the African Development Bank and other financial and development partners to help countries seize this window of opportunity, if there is one? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ihab. Typically at these great events, someone like me who's focused on private sector would tend not to be invited, but I'm really happy that the organizers of this event saw the value in inviting private sector. Because while we may not be able to address the causality of fragility, conflicts, and violence, we are very important in really maintaining the post-conflict situation where we don't want to revolve or revert back to that. And that's because we focus ultimately on jobs. And how do we do that? We focus on creating the right environment to attract private sector, because when you take a look at really where jobs are mostly created, it's not really in governments, it's really in the private sector, especially with SMEs in the context of Africa. But for sustainable SMEs, you need to have good infrastructure and you need to have, good industrial value chains. So I'll share, some of that, as I try to answer your question as quickly as possible. Now, the African Development Bank, we see ourselves really as Africa's bank. We're AAA rated. We support, other development institutions across Africa, such as AfriExim, which is in Egypt, also Africa 50, the Africa Finance Corporation, and hence, we see ourselves really as the big brothers and really, the AU's development institution. But let me step back and go with some context based on what you had mentioned. COVID-19 has shown the lack of resilience in most developing countries in the world, not just in Africa. The impacts have been both on lives and livelihoods. Global growth contracted by 3.5% in 2021, and this also even included a lot of the developed countries as well. In Africa, the pandemic did not claim as many lives as it did in the developed world, but it had large socioeconomic impacts, especially since our systems lack social safety nets, as you mentioned, for the unemployed and underemployed. However, Africa experienced a recession for the first time in decades, with GDP declining by -2%, with wide variation across countries, depending on their economic structure. In the face of these shocks, the African Development Bank was swift in responding with an up to $10 billion crisis response facility to help African governments and the private sector deal with the impact of COVID-19. Our view was that no country in Africa should be left behind irrespective. Our support of African governments focused on 3 pillars. One, deepening and reinforcing healthcare systems to respond to the health pandemic. Government providing Number two, government providing stabilization support to the private sector, especially SMEs, to maintain jobs. And finally, providing social safety nets to the poorest and unemployed in our countries. So for example, in Sudan, we provided $27 million to strengthen just health system sustainability and resilience for preparedness and response by containing the spread of the virus and allowing a reopening of activities. So this is just what we did in terms of healthcare support, notwithstanding the fact that there were arrears to the bank. However, this is really this demonstrates our point that no country should be left behind irrespective. In the private sector, we focused on food security, especially in the wheat value chain and other food crops. We have financed the Dow Group. We provided them $75 million of debt financing to grow their business, but also to backward integrate and support local production of wheat. And recently, we also provided $60 million to El Nefedi as well. So this demonstrates that notwithstanding the issues around conflict and violence, we still look to work with private sector. And by working with these African champions, such as El Nefedi and Dow Group, we are also able to support the SMEs in the value chains, in the wheat value chains, in the food value chains, all the way from farming and also to the supply of processed food products. We will continue to help countries emerging into peace agreements to put in place key building blocks for resilience and economic development. These include institutional building, regulatory and policy environment for good governance and private sector development, creating livelihoods and jobs, and inclusive socioeconomic infrastructure. These are core to the African Development Bank's strategy on addressing fragility, focused on three key pillars. One, strengthening state capacity and support for effective institutions. Two, promoting inclusiveness to build resilience. And three, leading on policy dialogue, partnerships, and advocacy on issues of fragility in Africa. For instance, our country strategy for South Sudan focuses on state building through capacity building and infrastructure development. This is necessary towards addressing the root causes of fragility by supporting the government to increase transparency in management of its natural resources, to enlarge its fiscal space, while implementing economic infrastructure that drive value chains and create jobs. In doing this, we consider private sector as critical for long-term inclusive economic growth. This requires addressing the infrastructure deficit, but also having an enabling environment that favors the creation and growth of businesses along value chains. And to further iterate this point, even though we're investing in Dow Group and also El Nefedi, value chains really have no borders. The idea is to really look at value chains from a regional perspective. And hence, we do expect the benefits of those investments to also translate to South Sudan. Our private sector development strategy as the African Development Bank emphasizes three pillars. One is to really improve the conducive business environment for private sector. Two is to help develop and implement transformative and integrated quality infrastructure in our member countries. And three is the promotion of enterprise development, which is the SMEs that I've already talked about. So in the Central African Republic, while the African Development Bank supported the COVID-19 response, it continues to support the emergence of private sector by focusing, for example, on the access to energy through the construction project of the Boali 3 hydroelectric plant and rehabilitation of Boali 2. We're also looking at opportunities in transport, ICT, as was already mentioned, and many other sectors in the country. So COVID-19 has indeed eroded the decade-long sustained growth of the continent, but it also opens up an opportunity for us to do things differently. We believe that we can build on the game changer of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to further steer growth on the continent. building resilience on the continent will require that we invest in, one, regional projects, power pools. I mean, that's another way of bringing the energy needs to some of our, conflict and, violence affected countries that are looking to actually go into, bigger development. Connectivity through transnational highways, as an example. So really harnessing the opportunities created by the Continental Free Trade Agreement means that these countries do not have to depend solely on what they can do as individual countries, but more in the context of what they can do in terms of Africa as a single market. And we believe that this is a game changer. We'll continue to work with the AU and also the Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariats based in Ghana to implement this as fast as possible, because then countries do not depend on just the country's potential, but they depend on the region's potential. You had also identified digitization as really, one of the constraints. Africa has one of the lowest rates of internet connection compared to the developed world. The urgency for connectivity, for economic, social, and financial inclusiveness for all Africans was truly exposed as a result of COVID. We continue to work from a private sector perspective with a lot of the ICT companies to provide the base of broadband connectivity. This is a focus for us. We're going to look at it through PPPs to allow governments to really best leverage their limited public sector capital, where there's the opportunity to just create the environment for private sector to come and thrive. We'll also look to do that so that at least government's limited capital is not impacted, but then the government responsibility to create the right environment is what would be harnessed. Manufacturing, once again, is very key, and developing value chains through special agro-processing zones, is an opportunity in a lot of these countries. And we are looking to actually, lead on that industrialization development across Africa. And then lastly, infrastructure development today cannot really be done, purely by the public sector because of the limited fiscal space, and hence really designing PPPs on a prioritized basis, focusing on economic infrastructure that would support transport corridors, which would lead to a greater creation of jobs, is going to be important. For us, you support one African woman, it means you support 5 people in the household. Also, you support youth. It also means that they don't really get attracted to really, distractions that could create the fragility we're seeing in some of our markets. And so we integrate gender, and we also integrate youth in all the projects we do as the African Development Bank, whether it's public sector, but also in the private sector. But we're going beyond that. We're really targeting, women entrepreneurs through our FAWA program. We're also, in the process of designing a youth entrepreneurship investment bank. And these are some of the models that we would look to test out, in fragile conflict, and transition states, to see if we can, to see how we ultimately bring the youth and women into the fold of, economic activity, which ultimately, stabilizes families, and then we hope also stabilizes countries. So we stand firmly and, behind our member countries, especially the fragile markets. We're focusing and targeting more private sector work in those markets, and we look to really support, in whatever way we can support as Africa's, premier development institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quaynor. This is really heartening to see, and I would like just to highlight your statement that really the African Development Bank is trying to do things differently. And that's exactly the essence of the so-called the resilience paradigm, the shift towards an international and regional partnership to focus on building resilience in African countries in order to withstand shocks that are multidimensional in nature, such as pandemics, conflict, and other sources of fragility and crises, like climate, natural disasters, and so on and so forth. And I like very much the comprehensive approach that you are taking in terms of the areas that will really make a difference by focusing on sectors that will increase the resilience of the African states, but also the African human capital. And that is very, very important. We now shift to the United Nations. Mr. Oscar Fernandez Taranco, Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support at the United Nations. Mr. Assistant Secretary General, there is no doubt that we are witnessing a rapidly changing global and continental African landscape as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak, especially for the peacebuilding and sustaining peace engagement by the UN, and international and regional actors. I would like to ask you, how are policy and programming are being adapted to respond to the emerging or even exacerbated challenges facing countries, African countries in crisis or emerging from or affected by conflict? Can you enlighten us with examples on such adjustments and how they are conducive to shifting the focus of programming and funding towards building resilience, the main theme of our session and perhaps of the entire forum? And to this end, to what extent is PBSO advancing synergies across the UN system and with other partners, such as the African Development Bank and the World Bank, in order to really focus on building resilience? How does your office envisage the next phase of the partnership with the African Union once the AU Center in Cairo is operational? And as we just heard from Ambassador Bankole about his idea about how this center can be a game changer, and what are the expectations from the center? How would it help fill the void in the AU approach to sustaining peace? I have more questions for you, Oscar, but I will leave it at here, and perhaps I will have an opportunity to come back at that. It's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ihab Mustafa Awad. It's great to see you. It's great to be with you. It's a big honor to be part of this very distinguished fellow panelists that you have assembled. Let me say good morning, good afternoon to the many who have joined us today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking our host, the Arab Republic of Egypt and the Cairo International Center for Conflict Prevention, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding. It is a true honor, actually, to be in the second edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development. We were there in its first conference. This is the second one, and it is a pity that we're not all together, because the coherence, the synergies that you want me to speak to was something that was put in evidence in the first Aswan Forum, with a multiplicity of actors that joined and were able to actually address many of the questions that you just raised. Let me start by saying that we just lived through quite an important review of the peace-building architecture. This happened last year in 2020. It was a chance to take stock as a collective of how to support nationally led and owned peace-building processes. And despite these extraordinary conditions imposed on all of us by the pandemic, the 2020 review, the third review, as you stated in the introduction, was very broad, very inclusive process with inputs from across the UN system, civil society, the member states, including through the Aswan Forum. Our reflection has consistently underlined that multilateral, multidimensional, people-centered, and whole of society responses are vital to meeting today's challenges. Prevention needs to be based on inclusive and sustainable development, anchored in human rights, gender equality, and the goal of leaving no one behind. The new twin resolutions adopted by the Security Council and the General Assembly on this 2020 review of the architecture are a strong affirmation of the commitment of member states to peace building and to sustaining peace, along with valuable additions to further implementation, particularly in relation to financing for peace building. Let me take the opportunity to briefly focus on 3 points and to be within the 8-minute limit. The first will be on our work to enhance synergies, as you just asked, within and across the UN. The second, the extent to which these synergies are absolutely critical to building back better after the pandemic. And then the third, of course, the criticality of the important partnerships. So on the first point on synergies, I think this new 2020 resolution underscored that development, peace and security and human rights are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. And that sustaining peace should flow through all the 3 pillars of the United Nations: development, humanitarian, peace and security. And it needs to be engaged at all stages of the conflict and in all of its dimensions. So important, again, the reaffirmation of peace building as something that happens before, during, and after a conflict. Across the UN's engagement, we have seen more active and effective collaboration among humanitarian, human rights, development, and peace actors towards prevention. And the Peace Building Support Office is now much better placed to enable and enhance this collaboration. The Peace Building Commission, which the chair of the PBC will soon address, and supported by my office, now has direct linkages. My office now with the direct linkages to the political arm of the House is helping and leading by example, actually as a flexible and dedicated intergovernmental platform. The 2020 Peace Building Fund, for example, approved last year some $173 million worth of programming in 39 countries, and therefore acting as a catalytic, timely, and flexible funder, and as an integrator of UN action in support to national peace-building priorities. In fact, we have been able to determine that for every $1 invested by the Peace-Building Fund, it has been able to leverage and mobilize 8 additional ones. So extremely important in the context of how to address priorities. In South Sudan, for example, you asked for examples, the Peace Building Fund has invested more than $20 million in support to national peace building priorities in the areas of focusing on strengthening dialogue for peace and reconciliation, supporting local peace building initiatives, women's access to land and participation in political processes, the prevention of gender-based violence and gender mainstreaming in the security sector, and equally empowering youth. However, despite the progress on coherence, the Secretary General has been very candid that adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for peace building continues to remain a critical challenge. This was also underscored by the new resolutions that the member states passed, and they have, in this resolution that was approved last year, they have decided on the importance of addressing the financing challenges by convening a high-level meeting on financing for peace building as a high-level event of the General Assembly. I think this is a critical opportunity that we must not squander, as it calls for bold and innovative approaches. We must switch, and I think several of the previous speakers mentioned this, we must switch from a response-oriented system costing billions of dollars in humanitarian response and peace operations to a system that focuses on nationally led prevention. Prevention which can save lives and resources, and most importantly, because prevention works. So I also, in this context, welcome Sweden's push in that direction to this concept of good peace building financing, which demands more coherent approaches within donor institutions and between donors and international financial institutions, especially in times of crisis. The second point on synergies to build back better is that coherence across humanitarian development peace nexus remains more important than ever in the context of COVID-19, which has devastated, as many stated already, families, communities, economies throughout the world, reversing important development and peace building gains and aggravating conflicts or fomenting new ones. So the UN's comprehensive response integrates building back better, especially through the development pillar. It is here that instruments like the Peacebuilding Fund can come in and complement health, humanitarian, and other socioeconomic efforts to the support to social cohesion and community resilience. In 2020, almost half of the peacebuilding funded UN programs made adjustments actually to respond to the peacebuilding dimensions of the pandemic. And therefore, we shifted gears very quickly to support national crisis management efforts to address and counter the rise in hate speech and disinformation, and to support social cohesion, national and local dialogues, and inclusive approaches in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Peacebuilding Commission played a very important role, but Ambassador Idris is going to be referring to that. The third and final point is on the issue of partnerships, that building back better actually requires every part of our system to work together within the UN, but also between the UN and the partners. And this is why it's so important what we heard today from the Vice President of the African Development Bank. An important result of the revitalization of PBSO is its strengthened capacity to support the UN's engagement with international financial institutions. And with the African Development Bank is a critical partner in prevention and peace-building context. And we are, as we speak, expanding this collaboration in joint assessments in the coming year, including through a recovery and peace-building assessment for Mozambique, and a joint fragility and resilience assessment with the Mano River Secretariat to identify root causes of fragility and to align priorities. This work actually builds on the excellent collaboration we had in Burkina Faso, which helped generate shared priorities and supported a national prevention strategy. And as we all know, a strengthened AU-UN partnership is critical in facing these immense challenges. And already we have leveraged our partnership in countries like Burundi and the Central African Republic, where the Peacebuilding Fund invested and directly supported African Union-led mediation and peace initiatives. So just to conclude, we must continue to further strengthen this interaction between the Peacebuilding Commission and the African Union Peace and Security Council, including through these annual interactive dialogues, as well as through the initiatives such as the African Union Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development in Cairo. Both the PBC and the African Union Peace and Security Council, through the Common African Position, agreed on the vital importance of complementarities between the different financial mechanisms of the UN and the African Union, and the need for much closer collaboration in support of peace-building priorities on the continent, including on the role of women and youth in building and sustaining peace. Thank you very much, Ihab, for this opportunity to share just quickly some of these points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. I believe your intervention proves the point that what we have started last year in the Aswan Forum, focusing on the paradigm shift, which was part of behind the result of the 2016 review of the peacebuilding architecture, and behind the Secretary General's reforms across the peace and security pillar, UN development system, and management reform, is still very much valid. It's still, if not that the COVID-19 pandemic has actually reaffirmed and asserted the need for that paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift towards focusing on building resilience, but which require, as you've kindly mentioned, and as Her Excellency, the Minister from South Sudan, the predictability of financing, partnerships, and the synergies across all actors. And I think that's the core of the paradigm shift. And that is a very good segue to the next speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Idris, the chair of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, Permanent Representative of Egypt. First of all, congratulations, Your Excellency, on your recent election as chair of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission for this year, which comes at a critical time. And critical times call for extraordinary capacities and persons such as yourself and your team at the Permanent Mission of Egypt in New York. After 5 years of relatively successful efforts to prioritize peace building, the scope and intensity of the challenges posed by the pandemic might again leave peace building, and hopefully not, as an afterthought, under-prioritized and under-resourced, as we just heard Oscar mentioning. Hence, the convening role of the PBC at this critical moment is more important than ever. Egypt, as both the African champion for post-conflict reconstruction and development and the chair of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission this year, finds itself in a unique position to strengthen synergies and interlinkages and to bring up the focus on long-term peace building and sustaining peace from a resilience point of view. In line with Your Excellency's focus during Egypt's chairmanship of the Commission, you mentioned that your focus will be on impact and that the chairmanship will be impact-oriented. What are the envisaged engagements to address the priority areas that you have set out for this year for the Peacebuilding Commission, including the PBC's role in supporting the objective of rebuilding back better in conflict-affected settings, mobilizing sustained financing for peace building, and advising the United Nations General Assembly on practical means for the UN system to support the AU's post-conflict reconstruction and development policies and structural prevention efforts. And your plans also to help revive the UN system engagement in addressing the root causes of conflict in Africa.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ihab, my dear brother. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much, dear brother Ambassador Ihab, and thank you to Aswan Forum, and best wishes to this important forum. We wish it could have been physical in Aswan, but we take a rain check for next time. My honor indeed to be with all these distinguished panelists and benefited from their valuable presentations. And my honor indeed to address this session as the current chair of the UN PBC and to reiterate the continued commitment and engagement of the Commission in supporting of the peace building and sustaining peace in Africa. Let me take you to the first edition of the Aswan Forum in 2019, which underscored the imperative of the paradigm shift from crisis management to sustainable peace and development, and emphasized that the existing normative and legal frameworks at Africa's disposal are adequate to advance this paradigm shift. The primary challenge lies in the operationalization of these frameworks. The forum also recognized then not only the multiple and the complex threats and challenges to peace, security, and development in Africa, but their unprecedented frequency and magnitude. Today, we face the extraordinary effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which have exacerbated the weaknesses of our health structures and mechanisms. COVID-19 has in some situations compounded early dire humanitarian situations. The socioeconomic impact of the pandemic on people in vulnerable situations is a particular concern. The pandemic, therefore, makes it more important than ever to promote global solidarity and partnerships in support of effective, coherent, and multidimensional peace-building responses. In 2020, 12 out of the 15 country and region-specific contexts where the PBC engaged were in Africa. In all its engagements, the PBC was nimble and quickly adjusting its program of work to support national and regional responses to the pandemic. In this context, I would like to highlight in this intervention following three messages. First, we need to ensure an impact-oriented international peacebuilding support tailored to the national and local needs. Second, we need to secure adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for peace building. And third, the Peacebuilding Commission, through its advisory, bridging, and convening roles, can play an important role in Africa's efforts towards sustainable development and lasting peace. On the first point, We need to ensure impact-oriented international peace-building support tailored to the national local needs. In this, respecting national ownership and leadership is prime. The PPC works and talks with countries, not to them. It talks with them. And it's only with the consent of the relevant country that the PPC initiates an engagement and coordinates political support that is context-specific. The twin resolutions of the December 2020 review underscored the principle of national ownership and emphasized that inclusivity is key to advancing national peacebuilding processes, recognizing the importance of the full, equal, and the meaningful participation of women and youth in peacebuilding. The PPC has recently adopted action strategies to strengthen its implementation of the women, peace and security, and youth and peace and security agendas, and this happened actually very recently in the last 2 weeks. In this context, the PPC has today multiple demand-driven and flexible engagements with countries and regions outside the setup of the current 4 country configurations, which are Burundi, Central African Republic, Guinea-Bissau, and Liberia. The PPC is also a platform that listens to, learns from the voices and work of local peacebuilding stakeholders, including from civil society. It also served as a platform to forge solidarity and share good practices and experiences, including through its engagement on thematic and cross-cutting issues such as women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, the impact of COVID-19 on peacebuilding, financing for peacebuilding, and the crucial role of institution building. In every country and region where PPC is engaged, we have had remarkable stories that testify to the resilience of communities, the role of civil society, and the innovation of the private sector. The PPC plays also an important role to facilitate the scale-up the UN system-wide support for conflict-affected countries, and also peacebuilding efforts has increasingly coordinated efforts to tackle the critical cross-border peacebuilding challenges. On the second point about the need to secure adequate, predictable, sustained financing, the 2020 twin resolutions have recognized the issue of financing as the most critical challenge facing the UN peacebuilding architecture. Therefore, we should spare no effort in helping secure adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for peace and development, including through the UN Peacebuilding Fund. The catalytic role of the Peacebuilding Fund is key to supporting peacebuilding efforts. In this regard, I commend the commitment of member states demonstrated in the high-level replenishment conference for the Peacebuilding Fund held on 26 January, including of low and middle-income countries. The operationalization of 2020 twin resolutions, through that we will convene relevant stakeholders in the PPC to generate inputs and action-oriented recommendations to feed into the high-level General Assembly conference to be held in the 76th session. My third and last point relates to the advisory and the bridging roles played by the PPC to build partnerships and mobilize resources. The Peace Building Commission is unique in serving as a bridge and connector in advancing the international community's broad peace agenda through strategic advice and briefings to Security Council, General Assembly, ECOSOC, and helping to overcome the current limitations dealing with the complex set of challenges. We should do more to strengthen the PPC's cooperation with the Security Council, as well as in exploring avenues to do the same with the GA and ECOSOC. In this regard, I am pleased to underline that the PPC will advise the GA on causes of conflict and promotion of durable peace and situation and sustainable development in Africa. This resolution is submitted, and before there was not this advisory role of the GA, but in the last adoption of the resolution, we injected this advisory role of the PPC to the GA on this important resolution for Africa about the causes of conflict and the promotion of durable peace and sustainable development in Africa. In addition to coordinating coherent UN system support the PPC has to continue to expand and strengthen partnerships, particularly with the African Union, the regional economic communities, and regional mechanisms, as well as international financial institutions, with a view to ensuring more efficiency and coherence.
I'm sorry, Your Excellency.
I am concluding. That is the last point, which is in conclusion. I am going to take this one moment, a minute more. In conclusion, as we address the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, scale up efforts to build and sustain peace across Africa and build a stronger and more resilient recovery, the Peacebuilding Commission will remain a valuable partner at Africa's disposal. And as an African chairmanship of the PPC, Egypt remains fully committed to ensure that the UN peacebuilding architecture's engagement in support of peace building and sustaining peace in Africa will continue to receive the requisite attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And this is very, very definitely enlightening as your vision for the Peacebuilding Commission. I am being advised by the organizers that we are very, very short on time. So we move to Janine, and we need to finish in about 4 or 5 minutes because His Excellency, the Vice Minister, has arrived and he's chairing the next session, and he will highly appreciate starting on time. Janine, it's over to you. Let me highlight one, at least, issue here. How does Sweden, as a key partner to the United Nations peacebuilding architecture and a key development partner, how do you envisage a more effective role in support of the African Union, regional and international financial institutions in forging a global partnership aimed at refocusing policy and programming on building resilient societies? Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank to all of you who has been speaking before. I have been listening with great interest, and I'm impressed by the efforts of the African Union and its member states, including Egypt, for sustainable peace. I couldn't agree more on the importance of financing, prevention, synergies, and coherence, which previous speakers emphasized. And of course, the role of the UN is essential in all those aspects. And thank you also, Mr. Fernandez-Taranco, for mentioning our efforts in financing. I also would like to congratulate the organizers for the ASFAN Forum, to which Sweden is a proud strategic partner. This comes natural with Sweden's strong ties to the African Union and its member states. And we appreciate the strong links established with the Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development taking place in May. As others have alluded to, the ongoing pandemic is causing enormous strains on society and risk exacerbating inequalities, worsening ongoing conflicts and creating new ones, not least mentioned by Her Excellency, the Minister, earlier. The pandemic adds to the challenges such as climate-related security risks, threatening lives, not least in already vulnerable societies. Today, hunger is also on the rise, and record numbers are fleeing their homes as a result of conflict, but also of climate change. Let me make 4 brief contributions to the topic of today's discussion on partnerships. This discussion underlines the importance of even closer cooperation between governments, the UN, the AU, but also civil society and other actors. Together, we need to make the sustainable peace agenda an integral part of the global pandemic response in its own right to limit human suffering, but also to underpin our humanitarian, development, and health efforts. Securing a fair and equal distribution of vaccine, including in conflict affected areas, must also be a priority. The UN and the African Union are the 2 most important organizations involved in tackling the root causes and structural drivers of conflict across the African continent, and a productive partnership is of course key here. The Peacebuilding Commission is a key platform for building coherence between UN actors, international financial institutions, regional and sub-regional organizations, and civil society in support of sustaining peace, not least in Africa. Since we are a bit short of time, I will jump to the other points as well. As many of you have mentioned, we also need a more on peace-building financing. And the review that was mentioned last year highlighted that adequate, predictable and sustainable financing remains one of the most critical challenging for peace building. And together we must do more, and Sweden is ready to do a part in this. This was important before the pandemic, and it will even be more so as needs risk increasing while resources are scarce. And Sweden will continue to support the UN Peacebuilding Fund financially and politically. The fund plays an important role in the pandemic response in fragile situations, not least in Africa. And furthermore, Sweden has taken, as mentioned also, the initiative on good peacebuilding financing, where we together with others will champion financing for peacebuilding, both in terms of volumes, but also for more predictable, long-term and flexible funding. Third, we need to move from words to action on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Despite progress made, we are jointly, we jointly commemorated this the last year. Women are still being left out of key peace processes. And if we are serious about taking on the challenges to peace and security that we are facing today, including consequences of the pandemic and the climate change, active participation of women is key to achieving sustainable outcomes. And all obstacles preventing active and meaningful participation of women must be removed. And the last point, we must take into action the effects of climate change. The Global Peace Index indicates 1 billion people are highly exposed to climate change, and approximately 400 million of these people live in conflict-affected countries. And that is clear. We need to better develop how we actively address climate change in conflict prevention, peace building, and sustainable peace. And just to conclude, we look forward to forging even stronger partnerships with our African partners, including the African Union. And let us continue to develop cooperation on peace building finance. Let us move from words to action on genuine implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and make sure we further develop the cross-cutting approaches of the nexus of climate change, conflict prevention, and sustaining peace, while building back better and more resilient from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Anine. And of course, Sweden's record and track record in the area of financing and also its political engagement in peace building is very clear and very well established. And this is really something that I have witnessed over the years. If I would like to wrap up, and I'd like to apologize for all our speakers, that all of you really have made very, very, very important points that deserve another round of discussion and of probing more of these points. But unfortunately, as you know, you are all well experienced in international conferences. Sometimes we are short on time and some other pressing engagements come up to follow. But I would like to say that one of my important takeaways from all your interventions here is that we are no longer have the luxury to do things business as usual, and that the entire process that started in 2016 in order to make a paradigm shift in the way the international community, the United Nations, the African Union should really approach long-term peace and sustaining peace is now, with the COVID-19 challenge, is more pressing than ever. I am optimistic that the infrastructure for that paradigm shift is already in the making in the United Nations and in the African Union, and in some of the great donor countries such as Sweden, but also in the African Development Bank. And that the Peacebuilding Commission, the Peacebuilding Fund, and the Peacebuilding Support Office in the United Nations, and the nascent AU Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, with the new center in Cairo, I think this is the infrastructure that will mobilize our collective shift towards the focus on resilience. Building resilience, meaning building government institutions, state institutions, focusing on the people, focus on local peace building initiatives, and first and foremost, ensuring predictable financing to finance these tools. I thank you all, and thank you very much for your invaluable contributions, and I hope to see you all soon in similar discussions or in person once we are past this pandemic. Thank you all, and over now to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ihab.
Thank you, Ihab. Good to see everyone. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Best wishes.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Madam Excellency. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.